Before sunrise, the Caribbean wasn't calm. It was hiding something. On Navy radar, faint signals began to merge into one shape too large to ignore. Within seconds, commanders realized the sea was alive with movement. What appeared peaceful hours ago was now the scene of a major military alert. Across the dark horizon, U.S. Navy destroyers and Coast Guard cutters shifted formation. A joint task force moved in silence, following what intelligence called the Sinaloa Convoy, a fleet carrying an unimaginable cargo. Nearly 76,000 pounds of narcotics, worth more than $473 million, were cutting through international waters, heading north. The mission that began that morning would rewrite how America fights its battles at sea. But for now, all that mattered was one order: stop them before they reach the shore. What followed next would show how speed, technology, and precision turned the quiet Caribbean into a battleground. Subscribe to military power to uncover what truly happened in this intense and relentless fight for control at sea. Across the Caribbean, the Sinaloa Cartel built its reputation on speed and stealth. Its fleets of go-fast boats and semi-submersibles were designed to move silently through the night, far from patrol lanes and commercial routes. Each go-fast boat carried 3 to 4 crew members, engines powerful enough to reach 40 knots, and fuel drums stacked high to extend range. The semi-submersibles operated even lower, with only their small hatches and exhaust pipes visible above the waterline. These vessels were handcrafted in hidden shipyards along Colombia and Central America, constructed with fiberglass hulls to absorb radar signals. For years, they allowed the cartel to move tons of narcotics undetected across international waters. The smugglers relied on tactics that combined precision timing with local knowledge. They studied weather patterns, waited for moonless nights, and coordinated departures with satellite updates on patrol schedules. Routes changed constantly, often shifting by a few nautical miles to avoid predictable interception paths. When tracked, they used decoy boats to draw patrols away from the main convoy. Some vessels even carried jamming equipment to interfere with radar and communications. In this environment, speed was more than a tactic. It was a philosophy. Every minute gained meant another mile between them and capture. But while the cartel mastered speed, the United States mastered visibility. Over the past decade, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard invested heavily in wide-area surveillance systems that transformed the ocean into a monitored grid. P-8. Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft flew daily patrols, scanning hundreds of miles with synthetic aperture radar and infrared sensors. High-altitude drones loitered above major transit lanes for up to 20 hours, transmitting coordinates to command centers in Florida and California. Below the surface, sonar networks traced low-profile semi-submersibles that once vanished without a trace. Together, these layers of technology formed what naval strategists call persistent awareness, a state in which no movement goes unseen for long. The strategic concept guiding this response is known as forward interdiction. Instead of defending near U.S. borders, American forces now project their presence deep into the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. This approach treats every suspicious contact far from U.S. soil as a potential threat to national security. Destroyers and Coast Guard cutters operate in overlapping patrol zones, allowing seamless handoffs between units. When aircraft detect heat signatures or radar reflections, surface vessels are already in position to intercept. Each phase of detection, pursuit, and capture unfolds as part of one integrated system. Technology gives this system its strength, but coordination gives it life. Data from aircraft, drones, and ships converge in real time through encrypted communication networks. Artificial intelligence filters incoming signals, highlighting anomalies and plotting likely routes of escape. Analysts compare those signals with trafficking databases built over years of intelligence gathering. What emerges is not a random ocean, but a map of intent, one that allows commanders to anticipate the cartel's moves before they occur. As a result, every vessel at sea, no matter how small or hidden, becomes part of a larger picture. This clash between speed and surveillance defines modern maritime warfare. The cartel's advantage lies in movement and improvisation, while America's lies in reach and precision. Each side studies the other, evolving with every engagement. The Sinaloa cartel continues to build faster and quieter boats, but the United States continues to expand its digital horizon. In these waters, visibility has become the ultimate weapon. Yet even as the U.S. gained control of the sea, the battle was far from over. The next 3 weeks would reveal how preparation turned into relentless pursuit. Over the span of 3 weeks, the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific became the stage of one of the most intense counter-narcotics operations in modern naval history. Every morning began with new contacts on the radar and ended with the sound of engines slowing as smugglers were forced to surrender. The operation's rhythm was relentless, driven by intelligence that left little room for rest. Each night, the command centers in Florida and San Diego updated maps that traced dozens of convoys moving north. Those digital lines represented millions of dollars in illegal cargo and a battle of endurance between the United States and one of the world's most organized criminal empires. The first major interception took place near the Galapagos Islands. Surveillance aircraft identified a semi-submersible vessel operating below the surface, its outline barely visible through infrared sensors. Coast Guard cutters moved in before dawn, surrounding the sub from 3 sides. When the hatch finally opened, agents found over 8,000 pounds of cocaine packed in waterproof containers. Farther north, off the coast of Mexico, another high-speed boat was intercepted after a chase, lasting less than an hour. The vessel carried nearly 9,000 pounds of narcotics hidden beneath barrels of fuel. South of Jamaica, 2 go-fast boats attempted to evade capture by splitting in opposite directions. Helicopters fired precision shots at their engines, disabling both within minutes and recovering an additional 6,500 pounds of contraband. Each engagement followed strict rules of engagement designed to minimize risk and ensure legality. Crews first issued warnings over loudspeakers, ordering vessels to stop. When ignored, warning shots were fired across the bow. Only after continued resistance did disabling fire begin, aimed at the engines rather than the crews. These actions were recorded in full, from radar tracking to final seizure, allowing every mission to withstand international scrutiny. The discipline of this procedure reflected both professionalism and restraint, qualities that distinguished law enforcement from warfare even in the heat of pursuit. By the second week, the pattern of success was clear. The United States had turned the vast ocean into a controlled, operating environment. Cartel vessels that once slipped through the waves now faced coordinated traps. Drones relayed live imagery to cutters hundreds of miles away, while reconnaissance aircraft guided surface teams with pinpoint accuracy. What had started as scattered encounters evolved into a synchronized campaign stretching across thousands of nautical miles. Coordination between the Navy and Coast Guard ensured that no contact went unanswered and no lead went unchased. When the 3rd week ended, the results were unprecedented. 19 separate smuggling attempts had been intercepted. A total of 76,000 pounds of narcotics had been seized, valued at approximately $473 million. Each load represented a broken link in the Sinaloa cartel's chain of supply. Beyond the numbers, the operation demonstrated that the ocean, once a sanctuary for traffickers, had become a theater of precision interdiction. Every mile of water crossed by smugglers now carried risk. Every radar echo could be their last. The success of these missions reshaped the perception of maritime law enforcement. It proved that patience, coordination, and technology could overcome speed and secrecy. The seas that had once favored the cartels now favored those who could see farther and strike first. Yet behind every success came a new challenge. The ships were full, the decks were crowded, and the evidence had to be secured before the next mission could begin. As the seizures continued, the focus of Operation Pacific Viper shifted from the cargo to the people moving it. The arrests that followed were not random captures, but deliberate strikes at the cartel's core. In total, 34 members of the Sinaloa cartel were detained during maritime operations, each playing a specialized role in a logistics network worth hundreds of millions of dollars. These were not disposable couriers or temporary recruits. They were engineers, navigators, and communication officers, the backbone of the organization's maritime infrastructure. Their capture represented a rare disruption in a system that had survived decades of law enforcement pressure. The arrests took place across multiple operations over 3 weeks. Some were captured aboard semi-submersibles near the Galapagos Islands. Others were taken from go-fast boats intercepted in the Caribbean. Each detention was the result of coordinated intelligence, combining real-time radar data, satellite imagery, and human analysis. Once a vessel was secured, its crew was immediately separated, questioned, and processed through an interagency chain involving both the Navy and the Coast Guard. Every step was documented to preserve evidence for prosecution under U.S. maritime law. By the time the 3rd week ended, follow-up investigations expanded the total number of suspects to nearly 60 across all related networks. Removing these individuals had an effect far greater than the physical seizures themselves. The Sinaloa cartel's maritime wing relied on a limited pool of experienced personnel capable of navigating open seas, maintaining semi-submersible machinery, and coordinating encrypted communications with supply bases on land. Training such specialists required time, secrecy, and resources. Their loss crippled not only operations but also trust within the organization. Replacing them meant recruiting inexperienced workers who lacked the technical discipline to manage complex smuggling routes. Each failed replacement increased the risk of detection, further tightening the noose around the cartel's network. The ripple effects reached deep into the cartel's command structure. Intelligence gathered from onboard electronics, navigation charts, and coded notebooks revealed how shipments were planned months in advance. When these plans fell into U.S. hands, they exposed patterns and supply hubs across Central and South America. This information enabled additional seizures on land, compounding the pressure on the cartel's financial and logistical arms. By targeting skilled operators instead of low-level runners, the United States disrupted the organizational rhythm that had once kept its maritime traffic steady and predictable. Economically, the losses were staggering. Each captured crew represented a failed investment measured not only in millions of dollars worth of cargo, but also in the cost of building and maintaining the vessels housed themselves. A single semi-submersible could cost up to $2 million to construct, requiring expert labor and imported components. With multiple arrests, several of these assets were abandoned or scuttled at sea. The campaign effectively erased months of planning and millions in cartel expenditures. Beyond the figures, the psychological toll was immense. For an organization built on control and fear, losing skilled teams to a coordinated international effort sent a signal of vulnerability. The significance of these arrests extended beyond immediate results. They demonstrated that the United States was no longer content with intercepting shipments. It was dismantling the human architecture behind them. By striking at the cartel's technical core, Operation Pacific Viper delivered a message far louder than any explosion at sea. The ocean had ceased to be a hiding place. It had become a courtroom, without walls, where skill, secrecy, and loyalty were no longer enough to guarantee survival. Yet victory came with its own complications. The seizures and arrests produced vast quantities of evidence and logistical challenges that would soon test the limits of every vessel and crew involved. When the USS Cole cut through the waters of the Caribbean, its arrival carried both tactical purpose and historic symbolism. 25 years earlier, the same destroyer had nearly been lost in a terrorist attack at Aden Harbor, Yemen, that killed 17 American sailors and wounded dozens more. The tragedy marked one of the most painful moments in the modern history of the U.S. Navy. Today, the Cole had returned to service under a different flag of intent, not one of mourning, but of deterrence. Its reappearance in a counter-cartel mission sent a powerful message. America was willing to bring frontline naval power to confront threats that had long hidden beneath the surface. The Cole's presence in Operation Pacific Viper was not a ceremonial gesture. It was a deliberate escalation of capability. The destroyer's Aegis combat system allowed it to coordinate multiple engagements simultaneously, integrating data from satellites, aircraft, and allied ships. Long-range radar arrays detected targets hundreds of miles away, while SM-2 and SM-6 missiles stood ready to defend the fleet against aerial or maritime threats. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter stationed on its deck extended its operational reach even further, conducting reconnaissance, search, and precision targeting. With this combination of weapons and sensors, the Cole acted as both shield and spearhead, orchestrating the entire maritime operation from its Combat Information Center. As the flagship of the task force, the Cole directed joint missions with the U.S. Coast Guard and allied partners, including the Royal Netherlands Navy's HNLMS Friesland. This coalition represented a new form of maritime cooperation, one that treated narcotics trafficking not as a police matter, but as a security threat requiring military coordination. Under Cole's command, destroyers, cutters, and aircraft formed a synchronized network that closed off smuggling corridors stretching from the Pacific to the Caribbean. Each interdiction was executed with military precision, guided by the destroyer's command systems and supported by real-time surveillance from Poseidon aircraft and drones. The symbolism of the Cole's return carried as much weight as its weaponry. To the American public, the ship represented resilience, a vessel that survived tragedy and returned stronger. To the cartels, its appearance on the horizon shattered the illusion of impunity. Facing a guided missile destroyer, smugglers who once relied on speed and stealth now confronted a level of force designed for warfare. For them, the ocean no longer offered safety. For the United States, the Cole's deployment illustrated a strategic shift, the transformation of counter-narcotics operations into a demonstration of deterrence. By assigning a destroyer once scarred by terrorism to lead the fight against transnational crime, Washington turned memory into message. The destroyer's deployment also served diplomatic and political goals. Operating far from U.S. shores, it allowed America to assert power without violating Mexican sovereignty. Its presence reassured allies and signaled to adversaries that U.S. influence on the high seas remained unmatched. The Cole's actions reinforced the idea that maritime security is an extension of national security. Every sortie, every interception, and every escort flight contributed to a larger narrative of global resolve. The USS Cole's return to combat duty embodied both history and strategy. It stood as proof that the lessons of past sacrifices could be reshaped into instruments of strength. In the Caribbean, its gray hull gliding against blue water became a visible reminder that America's recovery from tragedy was complete, and its will to confront new threats remained unbroken. Yet the commitment to sustain such operations carried its own cost. The question was no longer about capability, but endurance, and how far America was prepared to go to keep the seas secure. Every operation at sea carries a price, and Operation Pacific Viper was no exception. Deploying a guided missile destroyer like the USS Cole cost several $1 million per week in fuel, maintenance, and logistics. The presence of aircraft, drones, and support ships adds millions more. Yet when placed beside the value of what was intercepted, over $473 million in narcotics, the equation begins to change. Each mission prevented a fortune in illegal cargo from reaching American shores, and with it, the human toll of addiction, violence, and corruption that follows. In that light, the cost of deployment becomes less an expense and more a necessary investment in national security. The economics of deterrence have always been difficult to quantify. A destroyer's weekly operating cost may reach $6 to $8 million, but the societal damage of a single successful shipment far exceeds that figure. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration estimates that every dollar spent on interdiction saves at least 10 in long-term healthcare, law enforcement, and social impact. By that measure, the campaign's expense is justified many times over. The resources used to keep the Navy and Coast Guard active in international waters buy stability that cannot be measured in numbers alone. They buy safety for communities that might otherwise be poisoned by the flow of cartel narcotics. But cost is not merely a financial calculation, it is also political. The United States has chosen to fight this war far from its own borders, projecting power deep into the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. This approach, known as forward engagement, prevents the need for direct intervention inside Mexico, where sovereignty and politics complicate cooperation. By intercepting shipments at sea, Washington avoids the diplomatic fallout that would come with military actions on foreign soil. The strategy keeps tensions with Mexico contained while allowing the United States to act decisively where international law still grants freedom of movement. In effect, the ocean becomes both a battlefield and a buffer zone. Critics argue that sustaining such operations over time may strain budgets and personnel. They point to the fuel burned, the aircraft hours logged, and the constant rotation of crews. Yet commanders and analysts see it differently. They view this cost as the price of deterrence. Each patrol, each interception, and each hour of surveillance serves as a signal to the cartels that their routes will never again be uncontested. Maintaining presence is not a show of force. It is a continuation of policy. Just as the Navy maintains carriers in the Pacific and destroyers in the Persian Gulf, it now maintains warships in the Caribbean to protect the homeland from threats that originate thousands of miles away. There's also a moral dimension to this commitment. The United States bears both the resources and the responsibility to confront networks that profit from human suffering. To retreat from that fight would be to accept the costs of inaction, the rise of new trafficking lanes, the emboldening of criminal empires, and the erosion of regional stability. Inaction, in the long run, would cost far more than any single deployment. The presence of the USS Cole and its task force represents a statement of will, that defending national security is not optional, even when the price is high. The lesson of Operation Pacific Viper is clear. The sea is vast, and maintaining control over it demands sacrifice. But the cost of vigilance will always be less than the cost of complacency. America's strength has never been measured by how much it spends, but by how long it endures. As the campaign pressed on, its impact began to ripple beyond the immediate battlefield. The seizures, the arrests, and the display of power marked not an ending, but the start of a new doctrine at sea. In 3 weeks, Operation Pacific Viper changed the rhythm of the Caribbean. 76,000 pounds of narcotics worth $473 million were seized. Nearly 60 cartel members were taken into custody. And at the center of it all, a destroyer that once carried the scars of tragedy, the USS Cole, returned to the front lines as a symbol of resilience. What began as a counter-narcotics operation evolved into a demonstration of power, discipline, and strategic intent. The seas that once served as silent corridors for crime had been transformed into arenas of enforcement. The success of the campaign proved that coordination between the Navy, Coast Guard, and international partners could turn vast stretches of water into a grid of control. Every interception showed the effectiveness of early detection, precision strikes, and multi-branch cooperation. But beyond the achievements lay a deeper shift. The United States had redefined what it meant to wage a maritime campaign. The fight against the cartels was no longer confined to the boundaries of law enforcement. It had become part of a broader doctrine of deterrence, a message that America's oceans are as heavily defended as its skies. Yet even as the United States celebrated its victories, analysts warned that the cartels were not defeated, but adapting. Intelligence reports suggest new convoys are being organized with larger ships and extended range. Hidden fuel depots have begun appearing along the coastlines of Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama, designed to support longer voyages away from patrol zones. Some networks are exploring alternate routes through the mid-Atlantic, testing the limits of surveillance and endurance. Each adaptation demonstrates the cartel's ability to evolve, learning from every interception to find the next weak point in the chain. The battle at sea, like all asymmetric conflicts, is not about territory but persistence. For Washington, the question is no longer whether the United States can win at sea, it clearly can, but whether it can sustain the will to remain there. Maintaining destroyers, aircraft, and intelligence systems over thousands of miles demands more than funding. It demands political unity and public support for a strategy that extends beyond immediate results. The strength of deterrence lies not only in ships and missiles, but in the resolve to continue deploying them long after the headlines fade. America's maritime campaign has entered a new phase where endurance will define victory. The broader implications reach beyond the Caribbean. Every operation demonstrates to allies and adversaries alike that the United States is prepared to use its full spectrum of power to defend its borders, even far from its shores. The success of Pacific Viper echoes through diplomatic channels, reminding the world that the U.S. Navy remains both a shield and a signal of intent. But it also sets a precedent. When military assets are used against non-state threats, the line between warfare and law enforcement begins to blur. That is both the strength and the burden of modern security policy. The ocean, once a refuge for traffickers, has now become the front line of American resolve. The calm waters that once hid danger now reflect determination. The question that remains is not whether the United States can maintain control of the sea, but how far it is willing to go to preserve that control. The cartels will return, stronger and more resourceful, testing every gap in America's defenses. And when they do, they will find not just patrol boats waiting, but warships ready. The sea is no longer their sanctuary. The only question left is simple. When will they dare to challenge the United States again? What are your thoughts on this daring U.S. campaign against the drug cartels? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to Military Power for more in-depth coverage of the missions, weapons, and strategies powering America's fight against transnational crime and rising global threats.